Hi everyone, today I want to talk a little bit about a preview to the meta that we're gonna see in Season 25. So I kept getting a lot of questions about this during the last 2 weeks when the PTR was up, when I was testing dozens of builds, and it does seem like it is actually gonna be a very ridiculous season next time around. The main reason for that is that the soul shards are just absolutely overpowered even after the nerfs, and a lot of builds will very easily do GR150. Essentially, before this season it was always kind of tough, at least with even the best builds in the game. You had to do some grinding, you had to gear up properly, get your orcs, maybe fish some 100 keys, depending on your paragon and your skill level of course. But in the end it was always a bit of like a journey to GR150 if you ever wanted to reach that goal. And most people straight up just didn't, because the power level of the builds was scaled in a way where it was still not easy to do it. Next time around though, it will be very different. These soul shards are essentially around double the power, in some cases triple the power gain of an ethereal. So compared to Season 24, just imagine you take your build and you start dual wielding ethereals, and you can just kind of get an idea of how good they are. I don't believe that they're gonna change much anymore, so this is probably the season that we're gonna have. It's gonna be a season of 150s on probably every single leaderboard, and that includes Raymond and Draguls, which are, for example, not really in the best spot here right now on our non-seasonal tier list. So the best builds in the game are gonna blast 150. I've already shown this. I've done a 0 Paragon, Inner 150 solo, for example. Inner is expected to be the overall best build in the game. It is actually not the strongest by numbers, but it will perform the best because of how it works in a 150 speedrun scenario. While Akka's Bombardment is actually the stronger build mathematically, but it is a rather slow paced build and doesn't work very well in a speedrun scenario. So I talked about this in another video already. These are just some of these examples where kind of our usual scaling for the tier list falls apart, because we usually scaled builds by tier and not by 150 solo speedrun clear time. So the Maxroll team has already put a lot of hours into thinking about how to actually represent the relative power levels of builds in next season, because it's going to be so different from the usual. You're going to see that probably in a week or two when we push the Season 25 updates to live, but I want to give you a bit of an impression of what it will be like. Right now there's no Season 25 start date yet. We expect the 10th of December, but if they don't give us any announcement in the next few days, then it might be the 17th of December. So there is still quite some time until the season launch, and don't worry, you're gonna get the guide updates in time for every single one of these builds here. In the end, the relative power level of most builds doesn't change that much anyway, so there are a few winners of the season and there are a few losers because of balanced adjustments and how the soul shards work for some of those builds. One of the big winners is one that I've already described, the Akka's Bombardment. Inner also a really big winner, because previously it didn't benefit almost at all from ethereals, and now it gets the soul shards. So this is definitely one of the big winners here, and it was already S tier, it didn't get nerfed. So Inners is gonna be dominating. It's gonna be very easy to do 150 with this. So I expect that there will be a lot of hype around the Inner Monk. Obviously I'm gonna have an updated guide for you guys for this, and also some of the other top builds. There are a few builds that fall down here. For example, Firebirds had this mirror image nerf, so mirror images is dead essentially. The Hydra RGK version is dead, and now you can play Firebird Flame Blades, which is still pretty solid. It's not really a top tier build, but Wizard in general has a lot of builds here, as you can see in the A tier. This is kind of gonna stay there. Witch Doctor overall moves up a little bit because of the Shukrani change and the Lakumba change. So they get more toughness, they get a bit more damage in some of those builds. So I think especially Zunimasa is looking very solid. LOD darts also looking very good. Essentially you can expect the entire S tier and A tier to very easily clear GR150 solo. So I expect that the lowest Paragon clear that we're gonna see on most of these builds is gonna be somewhere around 2.5k or less for 150. So the requirement is not really high, and even if you don't make it that far, you can get close to 150 very easily, I believe. Even all the B tier builds will probably do 150 at less than 5k Paragon, and potentially all the C tier builds will also do it if some really high Paragon blasters decide to go for it if they really try hard. So without another balanced pass, this is what Season 25 will be. So this has some upsides, it has some downsides. I'm personally quite excited to just see how this will feel, how this will be for like also the community. I talked about it in more detail in my other Barbarian video lately, but I felt that this is a bit over the top, and that like kind of the pushing endgame has kind of been evaporated by this season theme. So this is probably not really a good thing for the long-term health of the game, and maybe future season themes shouldn't be that outrageous. Or maybe just the top build should be brought down more when we have these super powerful season themes. As far as the group XP meta goes and the group push meta, those are essentially the same next season, because GR150 is going to be so easy. And even if you don't do 150 very easily, you're probably going to play the same setups anyway, and maybe a few tiers lower if you're playing groups in like optimized setups. So Firebirds is kind of out. I think also most people will kind of skip the debuff light, and they're probably just going to play Innas. Innas has already been quite popular in Season 24 with the Ethereals, with the Wonka Blau Tempest Rush setup. That was already a pretty good setup. Obviously there's the red runs, and I think the Innas and the reds are going to be the two dominating XP farming setups that we're going to see. There is potential for some other things. You can also do these Firebird runs. You can do with the new Marauder that is actually also looking very powerful. So this is also going to be one of those like probably A or S tier builds that is going to blast 150. So it is decent enough to farm XP within group. But I think really the most powerful build overall is going to be Innas, and most people will play that. They can destroy 150, and this is what we're going to see. There is some potential for Witch Doctors. So there is Mundunugoo as trash killer, then there's Arakia as a boss killer, there's Zuni that is kind of like a bit of both. So theoretically, can also do some stuff there, and I believe we're gonna see more Witch Doctors than usual at least. So it's not gonna be as consistent as an Inner Monk, but Mundunugoo Witch Doctor in particular is actually at its strongest probably. Even going all the way back to pre-nerf Season 20 Mundunugoo Witch Doctor that just obliterated 150s. This was kind of like one of those early seasons where GR150 farming was a thing. And now we can actually do that again if you like. And you can do these with Guardian one-shots and these kind of things if you like for pushing. But realistically, I think it's a little bit just a niche thing, because Innas just does the job more consistently. There's also Bombardment Crusader, which is extremely powerful, as I mentioned in the beginning, at least in solo. It doesn't work all that well in groups, but it can also like easily blast through 150s. Essentially all these like S tier solo builds have a very easy time also carrying a group through 150 obviously. But the point is that pushing, at least in groups, has essentially been completely erased from the game in Season 25. So this simply doesn't exist anymore. You're gonna be blasting all the way to 150 essentially at not even outrageous high paragons. So we've seen this on the PTR. People are destroying 150s in like 3-4 minutes. And this comes already quite close to the record times that we have seen in previous seasons, when people were fishing 1,000 or 10,000 keys or something. So I expect that it's going to be a lot of clears, a lot of people finally achieving that goal, finally going to 150 if they try hard, if they haven't been able to do so before. And essentially, the more you grind, the better you become at coordinating a team and playing the builds. You will just have no trouble actually farming it. So essentially there are simply not enough Greater Rift tiers in the game to accommodate the power level of the builds, and this is why the meta actually looks like that and not any different. As I mentioned with, for example, the Mundunugoo, Spirit Branch, Witch Doctor, it would probably be a more powerful build if we had something like GR165 or GR170 in the game, where you would actually struggle extremely hard even at high paragons, even in a super good Rift with a super good team. But this simply doesn't exist. So now it's all kind of speedrunning, and their other builds are simply better, like the Inner Monk. Good part about the Inner Monk is also that it's simply basically the best build for anything else in the game as well. It's basically the top ranked build in T16, it's the best build in bounties. It is also the top solo experience build. So it is basically the build to play in Season 25 if you care about being as efficient as possible. For group play, the supports have not really changed. So it's going to be Z-Barb, ZDH, and then you have rat runs where you also need to see Necro. So either Z-Necro plus Barb or Z-Necro plus DH in the high-end runs. This is basically the same as before, as always. Red runs probably gonna be kind of popular with some people, I imagine, simply because they're fast, they're easy, they're known to people. The inners 4-man runs actually require you to play Shenlongs. It is not really the biggest deal, but I know a lot of people don't like Shenlongs, even if it's rather easy to do with this inner setup. The reason why it's so easy to do on inners is because you gain 200 spirit whenever you press a Mystic Ally button. So essentially you get 80% of your total in one go, and this makes it super easy to activate it. So I think you don't have to be very worried about this kind of playstyle. It's going to be very manageable. And even if you don't like this at all, there are other options like the Daibo that are still fine and are performing just a few tiers below that anyway. And this also concludes this overview here, so I haven't really talked about every single build in particular, but I guess you got the overall picture. The power level is extremely high, pushing doesn't exist for especially the top builds, especially the groups, and you're just gonna be blasting, especially on Inner Monk if you decide to play one. That being said, there are obviously the set leaderboards for every single class, so you can go and play some of the weaker non-meta builds and actually push them all the way if you like. So I would really recommend to take this season actually as maybe a bit of inspiration and as an opportunity to, you know, have fun with like a super strong build, get those paragons, get those gems, and then also go for some of those off-meta builds on other leaderboards, especially now that the soul shards give you so many free augments. It's going to be quite easy to augment multiple builds, and I think this is going to be a great season because of that as well. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for the updates both on Maxroll and on my channel. I'll keep you guys posted, and see you guys next time.